Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. I am very excited for the chat that we're going to have today. I am here with a longtime friend and colleague in the public relations profession here in Philadelphia, Jim DeLorenzo. Jim DeLorenzo is the principal of Jim DeLorenzo Public Relations. He has been a staple in Philadelphia public relations. If you follow big Philly events, you've probably seen his name on a lot of press releases. Jim, I'm so excited to have this particular chat with you. We're going to be talking about the role of the connector, that person in your life or those people in your life who naturally love making connections, taking one professional colleague and introducing them to another, bringing them together and doing it in a genuine way. And Jim, you have made a career out of, being in that role, connecting big brands and big personalities with media who are looking for them, connecting people. You and I have connected, and you've introduced me to some wonderful people. And I thought you were the perfect person to have this conversation with. This topic was your idea, and I love it. And I know
Thank you, Brian.
absolutely, and I know you're coming at it from the perspective of, or heavily from the perspective of those in-person connections.
Yes.
because
Yes.
because that, the past few years, I think a lot of us have gotten accustomed to networking online. Jim, you have throughout your career, even the past few years, really done a great job of getting out there and getting people connected in person. Jim, I could keep talking, but I'm going to send it over to you.
You're killing me.
For anybody listening who has not come across you in the past, can you give just a little bit of background of who you are, what you do, and in the context of that connector role and how key that's been to your professional career?
Sure. Well, thank you again, Brian, for inviting me, and I'm hopeful that this will be of interest to so many people today. I consider myself a professional storyteller, and I tell stories that bring positive attention to good works and good activities and good events. I stay away from the crisis communication. I emphasize telling good stories about good people and good businesses in a way that uh, brings their story to a greater audience, whether it be audience of buyers, an audience of customers, an audience of clients, an audience of attendees, or I'm hoping to work on a project right now with a school. So people who start to go to school, who will attend that particular school. So all my life I have worked in PR, and I didn't even know it when I started that that's what I was doing. But I had mentors along the way who guided me into a career in public relations, and especially over the last 7 years or so, I've been really working very hard to redefine myself as clearly as I can as a professional storyteller, and getting out there and meeting people and working with people and trying to make an impact on an audience and on my clients to bring them together to achieve great things.
Yep.
And I started this line of work, if you will, my vocation, when I was in high school, although I did not know that at the time that's what I was doing. And along the way, when I went to Villanova University, a number of people there saw something in me and kind of guided me along that path. And I was very fortunate to have some very great people who were connectors themselves, coaching me along the way and teaching me along the way and showing by example how to work in that area. And sometimes you lose track of it. There are definitely days where you're like, I'm not going to do that today. Or I've been on my own now 25 years. This July 1st will be 25 years. So I started my own business July in 1999, and through all the peaks and valleys, I've kept at it because it is my vocation. It is my life's work.
Well, Jim, first off, congrats on 25 years. That is a massive, massive milestone. I
You
just
just passed your 10th. You
back in
just
May,
passed
I
your
hit
10th
10.
anniversary.
Yeah, so you're giving me a new bar to aspire to for sure. And for having this conversation, Jim and I have both found our passion in public relations. Um, so you don't need to be in public relations to be a connector. Many
Exactly.
great connectors are not in public relations. But if you want to be in public relations and be good and effective at your job, you better have those connector instincts because that's a big
Exactly.
mandate of the profession. Um,
Exactly.
and my experience with being this connector role, Jim, much like your story, it didn't just start after I found a career path in public relations. I mean, I really saw myself starting to play that role during college, especially when I got involved with some student organizations and got into some event planning as part of my student organization.
Sure.
I found myself reaching back to previous relationships and people I knew, matching them up with some of these new college relationships, all for a common goal, and finding mutually beneficial ways to draw those parties together. When you talk about being a connector, empathy, you have to be a highly empathetic person and somebody with a high, just EQ and social IQ as well. Um,
Yeah, I
if,
would agree with that.
if you're trying to bring two people together where it clearly benefits you and maybe one of those other parties, but does not clearly benefit the other party, you're doing sales at that point.
Yes.
If there's one side you have to really lobby and leverage because the value isn't apparent. Now, to be a great connector, you need to really be able to put yourself in the shoes of the two sides you are trying to bring together. And
Exactly.
that needs to come natural to you. And listen, for anybody listening who might have flirted with that role in the past but want to embrace it a little bit deeper, you're going to get better at empathizing with each side and really being able to level with them. The more that you do it, the more that you are in those situations,
Right.
you'll understand what the different mindsets want. You figure out the nuances of personalities when you're trying to bring two different personalities together. So that's probably actually, Jim, a good pivot into talking about going back to those people who have maybe want to be a better connector professionally,
Right.
but they don't know how to approach it. I think that's a great segue into that. Jim, can you take the lead there and
Sure.
talk about how to do this naturally and effectively?
Well, it is an acquired skill, and you do have to work at it. And the one thing that has always kept me going with that is because the thing that keeps me going is that if I don't meet new people, or if I don't keep my connections alive, then I'm just in a vacuum. And if I want to effectively serve my clients and effectively serve um, in my vocation, I have to get out there and start making things happen. You got the old sports analogy. You have to put the ball in play. If you're gonna, for me, I love going out and meeting people. Some, especially during business hours. I'm not much of a nightlife guy anymore. I'm not much of a evening cocktail hour events, but I'm really, and but I love that during the day, connecting with people, seeing people. So the way I kind of started it really was working as a volunteer intern at Villanova in the athletic department, specifically the sports information office, which is the PR function in college sports. I would see these people coming into the office every day or every night for a game, and you know one way that led me to meeting these people or was that they always saw me there. being present and being there and being available and being open to work, open to volunteer, open to say hi, not being in my shell. And I can fall back into my shell very easily. But one of the things that I realized is if I'm ever going to do anything in my life, I have to kind of break out of that shell a little bit. So I would sit there at the scorer's table and I would be working at the game, but I'd be in the office before the game, talking to the reporters that were coming in, meeting some of these people for the first time, meeting people again for a millionth time. But each time they saw me, they would say, "Hey, there's Jim over there. Let's go say hi to Jim." Or I would say, "Hey, look, there's Howard over there. I'm going to go say hi to Howard." So that started in college. And that started when I was about 18, 19 years old. And I refined it over the years because as I'm getting older, as we all are getting older, you realize, okay, go with your gut. Go over to somebody and introduce yourself. And if you get a bad reaction, don't worry about it. Just say, "Well, thank you. It was nice meeting you. I hope we get you," and move on to the next person. But don't be one of those people that is at a networking event and says, "Hey, how are you?" And the person that you're talking to or just started talking to starts talking, and then you're like this, "Hey, there's Joe. I'm going to go over there and say hi to Joe." You can't be the flirty guy. You got to be the connecting guy.
Yeah. And I was going to add on to that, or grab your phone during that conversation or engagement.
No, when I go to those things, I turn the volume down and I put it away in my pocket.
Yeah, I mean, remember that when you're at networking events, it's for true in-person human-to-human networking. When folks see you with your head buried in your phone at those types of events, it's not a good look, and it's not
a good look.
And networking.
And again, I'm of a different generation. I mean, when I started in this business, I was working on an electric typewriter, sometimes a manual typewriter. I was making photocopies or mimeographs, and I was using a telecopier, not a fax machine. We didn't have email, we didn't have computers, we didn't have a lot of things that we have now. Landlines, mailing press releases every Monday morning. Would fold and stuff tons of press releases and send them out to all the newspapers, hoping that we would get there by Wednesday, that kind of thing. So I've seen a lot of different technologies, but the one thing that doesn't change is people's interest in people and the storytelling part of, we talk about an elevator pitch. What is an elevator pitch except an introduction? And who are you making that introduction to? A stranger. Someone that you think you might want to meet, someone that you think you might want to know. You can't just leave it to being sitting behind the computer or sitting on the laptop or scrolling and texting. You have to actually look into their eyes. You have to actually shake their hands. You have to be visible and present. So that's what I do. I'm visible and I'm present, and I try to get out there.
Yep.
This week was not a good example because I spent a lot of time tethered to the desk this week to do some things. But
yeah, it's like 90 degrees out right now. You don't even know right now.
Right. But I want to use a recent example. And when I say recent example, I put together an event in New York City in September of 2022 for an author client of mine who was a really big time name in sports marketing. So we did it at a law firm in New York on Park Avenue that was very connected with the sports world. And we got a very good attendance that night. I had probably, in a room that seated 100, I had 200 people. It was standing room only. We had a great panel. Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the National Hockey League. We had Zach Leonisis, who's the CEO of Monumental Sports down in Washington, D.C., the Wizards and the Bullets, the Wizards, the Capitals, and other things. And then we had the retired CEO of Major League Baseball, and then we had my client. And we had this panel discussion, and I had spread the word amongst the New York media. I had spread the word around the national sports media. And we had a lot of people, as I said, in the room. And one of the people who was in the room came over to me before we really began the program. And he just came walking right up to me and says, "Hi, I'm John Zeit, and I'm working with a company called Vinyl Lab. And I really wanted to meet you and thank you for putting this event together." I said, well, thank you, John. Like, what does Vinyl Lab do? And he was telling me what Vinyl Lab does, or what he wanted it to do. And then he introduced me to his friend who actually had brought him to the event, a gentleman by the name of Wes Mason, who's been the CEO of some major healthcare companies in the Nashville, Tennessee area. So we're having this brief conversation before the event begins, and then I'm standing with them during the event because they didn't get there in time to have seats, so I figured I'd stand with them. And then I was milling about the room, taking photos, and then coming back to them. And at the end of the event, I said to them, "When can we get together? I'd love to talk to you some more. I know this is a kind of a crazy night. You probably want to get out of here." He said, "Well, let's get together." He said, "I'll give you my card, and we'll call." And that moment passed, and that was in September. Probably around November, I got my first call from him, and it was only recently. I've been working with him for about 2 years now. But out of that meeting, he came over to me, introduced himself to me and his partner, and we had a nice conversation that night. And then that conversation continued over several months until now I'm working with him as a client. And what he told me, I said, "Why did you come over to me that night?" I asked him point blank, "Why did you come over to me that night?" He said, "Well, it looked like you were the guy who was running the room. You were engaging with people. I could see you talking to people and looking them in the eye." And he says, and he told me, "I hate going to networking events because I don't know what to do. So what I do is I fixate on one person in the room that I think that guy must be interesting. I want to go up and talk to him." He said, and that's what I did. Now we're 2 years into a client, colleague, advisor role with him because he took the spur of the moment to come over and say hi to me based on his shyness and discomfort in the networking events. But at the same time, he had an agenda. He had a reason to come over to me. He said, "I wanted to meet the person who I thought was the hardest working, the most interesting person. So I came over to you." Wow, but that's a networking, connecting story that came to mind immediately when we started talking about this.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and taking that approach, the approach that he took is like, okay, I know I have to go to this event. I'm uncomfortable at these events, but let me read the room. Let me read the room and say, okay, let's go over there and introduce myself. And he had his introduction well oiled. He was very forthcoming about what he did and what he was trying to do, and it was just a nice conversation. And that nice conversation, that nice introduction, has leveraged itself into an over 2-year relationship now.
Mm-hmm. And I love that example, because you're right. I mean, when playing the connector, and forming, mutually beneficial relationships, there does need to be some purpose behind it. Earlier, I talked about the importance of having high social and high emotional intelligence if you're going to be an effective connector. Because I have come across people who, while well-intended, will make a connection, or try to make an introduction on the fly. And I run into this sometimes online, where it's kind of a simplistic thought process. Oh, well, you're in PR. I should connect these two via email. They don't ask my permission. They connect me to this person. I feel obligated to take the call. It's kind of a waste of time. Not that the other person isn't a good person to maybe connect with, but time's a valuable asset, and to be kind of put in that position, forced to have that conversation when there really isn't a whole lot of purpose behind it, it isn't always the best way to play that connector role.
But at the same time, you could take that introduction and conversation and maybe there's something in there that sparks like, I don't think I can help you today, or I don't think I don't have anything that immediately springs to mind, but I know this guy, or I know this woman, I know this person. Let me introduce you to them. And now you're playing connected to this guy who you don't necessarily have anything going forward with. But at the same time, now he knows, hey, he introduced me to so and so, and that was pretty cool. Let me see if he knows anybody else that might be interesting, or let me see if I can find somebody that would help him.
No.
Part of what I do in the connector role is emulating or paying. I hate the expression paying forward, but paying forward something I witnessed when I was 18 years old, and I was visiting the Villanova University campus for the very first time on a day much like today in early June, and nobody was on campus because summer school hadn't started yet. And I'm wandering around the campus with my father and my mother. We go into the field house, and there's a sign on the door over the balcony saying athletic director. And my father, out of nowhere, just goes running upstairs and says, I'm gonna see if we can get some time with him. And God bless the late Ted Aceto, who was the athletic director for many years there. He came out of his office and said, come on up. And he spent an hour with me. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. And he talked about the things I might be able to do at Villanova, why it would be a good place for me. And not only did he become a friend and an ally, but he was my first boss. He hired me the day after I graduated to be the assistant sports information director, which is a role I had been kind of filling anyway as a volunteer intern. So, day after graduation, full time, put him on the payroll. And I worked with him for the next 10 years or so. And that moment in time where he took the time to meet me, talk to me, get to know me, and then said, okay, well, when you come back in the fall, come in and see me. And he became a friend and an ally and a mentor for the next 14, 15 years.
Yeah. And there is absolutely a level of intuition that I think great connectors have.
The gut reaction.
They don't have to go off a recipe or a formula. They're not reading off of a sales script. They again have that high level of intelligence and that gut intuition. I mean, whatever we want to call it, the best connectors have that. They know people. They understand the nuances of personalities and just have a good sense of, these two ingredients are going to make a great, outcome.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of where I want to be at this stage in my career too, is, making those connections to people so that, when my client is looking for somebody to help them with a podcast, or I have a client that's looking for somebody to help them with gaining additional investors, or even as far as like I meet a client for the first time, or I meet a person for the first time, and you've mentioned the events that I do. I asked him, he told me he had like 7 kids, and I said, and it was the week before the Fan Expo Philadelphia, and I said, why don't you bring your kids to the event this weekend? I'd be happy to have them as my guests. And I wasn't looking at doing any business with him. I just was like with his story and what he was telling me about the nonprofit he was working with. So he brought a bunch of his kids from the nonprofit to my event that weekend as my guests, and they had a fantastic time. Mm-hmm. And now, hopefully, whenever he thinks of me, he'll say, oh, he shared those tickets with me. Our kids had a great time. Let's reconnect. Let's have lunch. Let's do something.
Yeah, and that's a great perspective to look at it from too, because we talked a lot about being that connector. Not everybody's going to naturally be a connector. Most people are not very effective connectors. Now, if that's not really your persona, you're probably someone who still wants connectors in your life. I can't name very many successful entrepreneurs who do not have very key connectors in their lives. I mean, I'll tell you, I don't know if my sister's Heather's listening right now, but this woman is a super connector. It's amazing how, being able to watch her, she's a much better connector than I'll ever be. And she just has those instincts, everything that we talked about. And, having her as a sister, I mean, she has with my business, you know, I can think of several years ago, I was really struggling to find a good web developer. I cycled through a couple different ones and it just wasn't a good match. I needed a web developer who was also a good communicator. Sometimes they can speak code, but they can't,
They can't
travel
listen.
to the level.
They're not. Their
And
listening mode is not turned on.
Yep, exactly. And sure enough, my sister connects me with her old college roommate who I knew way back when, but I never put that together in my head, to the thought to reach out to her. And now, I mean, that was 7 years ago. Still my web developer, and I've ended up referring her business too from the work that I've done with her. It's been wonderful. But again, having that connector, if you're related to one like me, that helps a lot. But making sure, my advice to anybody listening is just take a step back and think about the people in your life and who are those reliable connectors for you, and do not take them for granted.
Exactly. You have to keep in touch with them. You have to keep. Um, we're on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the perfect tool for this. A lot of people will send you an invite to connect on LinkedIn, and there's really nothing behind it except they saw your name. Or you get the spam people from foreign lands who have a dubious connection to anything, and you see that one or two of your connections are connected with that person. And it's like, maybe not. But the ones that you pick and choose, be intuitive, be instinctive, and be intelligent in the people you connect with on LinkedIn, because making those connections with people on LinkedIn will help you in connecting with people that are outside of your comfort zone, outside of your immediate sphere of influence. So one of the ways I use LinkedIn is to, okay, I really want to learn something about this one particular company, or I really want to find a media member who I could potentially pitch to, or I want to find somebody who could be a guest on my podcast, or things like that. So I use LinkedIn every day to just kind of massage my connections. And if I see somebody on there that I say, oh, that would be perfect for, I'm working with a startup nonprofit, if you will. And how do I connect her with somebody who can help her with fundraising? How do I connect her with someone who has written a story about a similar topic and maybe could do an interview with her? How do I connect her with somebody who can help her bring the kids in her nonprofit to a basketball game or a football game or something? So I massage my network. I look at my network. I call people sometimes and I think, we really haven't done much together. Or before I do that, I'll say to them, hey, what's going on with you? How are things going? And they might say, oh, I've retired, or I'm stepping away from this, or, I'm no longer interested. That's fine. But I'm making connections with them and I'm communicating with them. And that's the part of the PR role, that goes into the connecting with people. Listening to their stories, hearing them out, paying attention, and then being able to make a connection in your head. I was just reading the other day about so-and-so. You're just about to graduate from Syracuse University with a bachelor's degree in public relations and communications, and you say you want to be a food and event and hospitality PR person coming out of college. I just had lunch the other day with Irene Baker Levy, and she would be perfect for you to meet because all she does is food and hospitality. So, you make that connection with that graduating student with that person in your network, you let them get together and you can step out of the way.
Yep. I love that you used that example because literally an hour and a half ago, I was on the phone with a student looking for a comms role within a certain field. They called me, we chatted. I knew exactly who I wanted to introduce them to, and it's great to have those relationships. And again, when you can be that connector, I think the most important thing is don't always make it transactional. Listen, if you're an entrepreneur, yeah, you have to make money, but not if every connection that every introduction that you make, every time you connect two sides, if you're transactional about it in nature, you're not a connector, you're a salesperson. And
right.
it's fine being a salesperson, but no, I mean, if you're not,
I play the long game. I play the long game. I've got people that I'm still in touch with that I met 40 years ago at Villanova. I'm working with the school that I'm hoping to get as a client. Was brought to my attention that they needed somebody by this football player at Villanova who I met 40 years ago. 44 years ago, actually. So, I mean, we just, and we're still connected. We still talk. And he had an idea. He said, I'm going to introduce you to them.
Amazing. Yeah. So, Jim, I think we're just a little over time, but I want to give you the last word. I mean, with this whole conversation, I mean, what is the big takeaway that viewers, should come away from this with?
Say yes to opportunities. Say yes to showing up. Make yourself available and open and honest, and you won't get burned. You may get discouraged, but you won't get burned. Making yourself available, saying yes to the opportunity. If someone says, hey, I'm going to this networking event tomorrow night, would you like to come along with me? Or there's a networking event that you spot and you say, maybe I should do that. Maybe not. Just take the opportunity. Say yes to the opportunity. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to have something good come from it. My first event out of the lockdowns, the first public event that I went to after the lockdowns was in the early 2022. Yeah, early 2022. I was invited by a longtime friend to go to the Coaches versus Cancer breakfast for the March Madness at the Palestra. And I hadn't been anywhere in public for over 2 years at that point, as far as without Zoom and things. So I went to the event, saw a lot of people I hadn't seen for a long time. Somebody saw me on TV the next morning who I'd worked with like 10 years before, because I was in a shot of somebody talking to Jay Wright, and I'm standing next to Jay Wright talking to him, and I was carried on the local newscast. And somebody saw me on TV and said, I'm going to give him a call. I think my client could use him. If I hadn't said yes to going to that breakfast, I would have had this client for the last 3 years, which was a total stranger. But it was somebody who connected me with them, because another person connected me with that event. It all kind of, the network and the links and the chains keep growing.
Yep. Amazing.
And that's because I say yes to things.
Love it. Say yes, people. Say yes. Jim DeLorenzo, Public Relations, thank you so much. I love this chat. I know you and I are going to continue it offline. Everybody who tuned in, I hope you learned some things. Again, being that connector is valuable, and having those connectors in your life are so valuable. Don't ever take them for granted. Collect as many of them as you can. Thanks for tuning in this month, and I will catch you all next month. Thanks so much.